Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining this episode of Question Pro's weekly fireside chats, our first of 2024, and also my first, having joined Question Pro late last year to lead on CX in the UK. It's a huge pleasure this morning to be joined by Vinay Parmar, who I've known for some time now, having met on the CX speaking circuit, and someone I often turn to for, as he calls it, Vinspiration. You'll be able to tune in each week for 30 minutes, usually at 11 a.m. GMT, depending on our guest topics and regions we're focusing on. We're live on my LinkedIn as well as Question Pro's YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook channels. So probably good time for some quick introductions. As I said, I'm Nick McFarlane, Question Pro's Director of CX in the UK. I have 20 years customer experience in UK brands such as Sky, Vodafone, and Kazoo. And my guest is Vinay, who is the founder of Dhruva, a brand new CX consultancy. He also has tons of CX experience, previously being CXO of National Express and working at brands like Egg, Audi, and O2. Hey, Vinay, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I've been involved in, I guess, customer-facing stuff for pretty much most of my life. I mean, my dad had his own business, a greengrocers in Birmingham. So I've always been in and around business. And I remember as a kid being, during school holidays, being in the shop and being sat on the till next door or whatever, just listening to my dad chatting to customers and stuff. So that was probably my earliest experience, and then I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more. But yeah, ever since then, always been in those customer-facing roles. But it's a great pleasure to be here and talk about CX and hopefully share a bit of inspiration.
Awesome, thanks, Vinny. So, what are these fireside chats with Question Pro all about? Really, they're just informal discussions with our clients, partners, and subject matter experts to share ideas, thoughts, experiences, challenges and best practices in CX, market research, and insights. So just a quick reminder before we jump into it, if you've got any comments or questions you'd like to share with us, please do post them and we'll try and make them part of the discussion. Right, so jumping in, Vinay, you mentioned that sort of lifelong customer focus from your dad's business and all of that, but tell us how your CX career has developed over the years and what led you to start your own consultancy.
Yeah, like all great CX careers, it started by accident. I should have been, probably if my mum had her dream, doing something much more academic. I wouldn't necessarily be a doctor, but something in that kind of field. But I didn't do very well at school. I screwed up my exams. Even though I was predicted to do really well, I just didn't concentrate enough. I think I have some focus issues when I was younger, and played too much cricket and then didn't really revise for my exams. And then, opened the envelope and to my shock, oh crap, I've failed all my exams. So I left school, redid them, passed the second time round. And I ended up eventually working in a contact center at the age of 18. And it was taking calls from back in the days before the internet, which you and I will both remember, because there is a world before the internet. That back in the days before the internet, what used to happen when people wanted to buy large purchases and do it on credit, you'd have to call up what they called a lending house or a finance house to get to arrange the credit. And I was the voice on the other end of the phone. So at 18, I was, assessing applications for cars, for leather sofas, for television sets, you name it. That's what I was doing. So I worked in that bank for about 4 years. And one of the things that I did early on in my career, and I think it's just my natural sense of curiosity and wanting to see the big picture, was that I just became, I guess for want of a better phrase, nosy. I wanted to know what other teams were doing around me, because I felt like if I only ever knew what my team and what I did, I could only contribute to that level. But if I knew more about the wider context, I might be able to add value or learn and do my job better. So I guess I developed my own graduate scheme, really, just meeting people, talking to them about what their teams did. Through that, I got opportunities to work in other departments and learn more about the business, fraud detection, underwriting, business development, marketing. I had stints in all of those. I then left there and went to work for Prudential Banking, which was the first, at the time, the UK's first bank for 100 years. So it was still in its pre-license stage. That later became egg.com, which many people remember, which was a revolutionary brand in banking back then in 1998. Really, the whole ethos was about transforming customer experience, doing more for the customer, brilliant products, brilliant culture. And that's really where I cut most of my teeth, I guess, and got most of my real CX experience, because it was such a CX focused company, really focused on trust, advocacy, loyalty through all the things that we did, that I learned a lot of my trade there. Spent about a decade there. I worked at a couple of outsourcers for a little while after that. Then I set up a business then to be a freelancer, where I kind of consulted with people like O2 and RBS and TUI and other brands on parts of their organization. And then in 2015, I spoke at National Express's company conference and stood up on stage, did a session about customer experience, which they really enjoyed. I went back in to do what should have been a 3-month interim assignment, which turned into 6 months, which then turned into 8-year career at National Express, really driving their customer agenda, changing their culture, helping them to kind of create their overarching CX strategy. And then in July this year, I left after an amazing 8 years and decided that I wanted to do something different. So here I am with Dhruva Star.
Wow, I love that story, and it's funny. It's like a very similar background that you mentioned to mine. I wasn't quite as successful as I wanted to be at university rather than at school, and I ended up dropping out at age 20, working in a contact center for BMW and being curious. And I think curiosity is something that plays a big part in customer experience. Wanting to know how stuff works, wanting to know how things come across to customers. And I certainly remember egg, and also what you mentioned there just made me laugh. Like, we met at a CX speaking event, and great things happen off the back of CX speaking events, clearly, and your gig at National Express is testimony to that. So really good. And I guess with Dhruva Star now, you're probably talking to a lot of customer experience professionals and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges CX pros are facing currently?
I think the challenges haven't really changed much over the last probably decade. One of the things that frustrates me, I guess, is that at the beginning of every year, you get a set of reports published by Gartner and Forrester and people talking about how they've interviewed executives, and everyone's saying that this year CX is going to be the thing that we're going to invest in. This year it's going to be the thing that's our number one priority, and that gets repeated year after year after year. And what I see as a challenge when I talk to a lot of CX leaders is the difficulty they have in getting sponsorship for their initiatives, being listened to. Often when times are tough, they're one of the first places that people go to make budget cuts and rein back on stuff. The constant challenge about their data and insights, is that really true? And how do you prove that? What's the ROI on putting that plant in the reception? Kind of ridiculous conversations.
It's a nice plant.
So there's a lot of challenge around there. So they're working with an emotive subject in an often logical world, and trying to make the two meet together is quite a challenge. So I think they face a lot of those kind of challenges, really. And I think that hasn't really changed over the last decade. It's probably getting harder, because what's now happening is there are other distractions. So, technologies, we've got some amazing technology that's being developed, and AI now is the kind of the in every conversation people are talking about AI, and that's the new kind of shiny thing that people are focusing on. So I think that's the key challenge. But overarching, the I guess the enduring challenge is that CX is like farming, in that you farm for tomorrow, you don't farm for today. And often the challenge is that the results from CX, there are two things. The results from CX sit in other people's budgets, but they're not necessarily immediate payback. So you might not see the value in for 12 months, 6 months, because it's repeat purchase. And depending on your product or service, the frequency of repeat purchase might not hit your, P&L till next year. Because, for example, if you're a holiday company and you're not going to book more than, maybe two, but you're not going to book a holiday every month unless you're mega rich.
And got enough time off.
Yeah. So I think it's that balance between the short-term world that we live in, where we need to deliver results now to hit numbers for the quarterly and to help contribute to the results for the business, but also understanding that CX is a longer-term strategic play, which is more about long-term success and sustainability. And I think that's the battle really that CX leaders have.
Yeah, and sort of any tips or anything to sort of help people overcome some of that. I think, fascinating that you say it's like farming, it's for tomorrow. And also, as the CX leader, you're often not in control of the things that need to be done to improve things or to get returns on investment. Are you having conversations helping people sort of navigate this world?
Yeah, and I guess two or three immediate things that come to mind. I think, your ability to balance finding things that can deliver some short-term benefit as quickly as you can, but as well as being clear about that there are things that you're doing that are more long-term, being really clear about what that delivery is. I think the second thing is that, as I talked about earlier in my career, make it your business to spend time in other areas. Too often we sit in our own chair and say, oh, they're not getting it, they're not understanding, they're not listening to what I'm saying. But actually, it's that old adage of first seek to understand before you're understood. Yeah. So spend time understanding how those other functions work with your peers in that group, understanding what fires they're putting out, what challenges they have. The more you can understand about what's going on there, the greater your opportunity and ability to influence. It's like, I'm going to throw out loads of analogies, in this conversation. It's like being a conductor of an orchestra. You see, when you're the CX or the person that's responsible for CX, you're like the conductor, because you don't actually play an instrument, you don't make a sound, but you're dependent on everybody else making the right sounds at the right time. So that ability to influence across the table, speak the language of your counterpart, so be able to converse with your CFO, with your chief commercial officer, talk marketing with your marketing director. Being able to really create those connections and influence is really important.
And ties in with one of my sort of core beliefs or something that I say a lot about customer experience, which is that put at its most simple, customer experience for me is just a bunch of people trying to make another bunch of people's lives easier.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? You listen to their problems, you build a great relationship with them, and all of that sort of stuff. So obviously there's a huge people aspect to it by the sound of stuff, and we've mentioned curiosity already, and that goes a long way when you're trying to understand other people's worlds. I guess we mentioned as well, start of another year, have the problems really changed, but there'll be all of these guides, trends, things coming up, what's going to be hot in 2024. Question Pro have just published their own CX 2024 trends guide, which talks obviously a lot about AI and how it can potentially be a game changer, how it can help improve CX outside of just customer services, which I think we see sometimes that's a strong use case. Other things like changing metrics and the importance of employee experience and customer experience. What of the things that you're seeing in these trend reports and these innovations that are coming up really excite you, or do you think our listeners, our audience should pay attention to this year?
So, whilst I say that the challenge for CX hasn't really changed, what has changed is the technology and the tools that we have to enable us to design better CX. And I think, first and foremost, you mentioned customer service. The first bit is that whole really getting the organization to understand that it's not customer service. Customer service is a part of CX. But if you imagine like a string of pearls, the string going through the pearls is CX, and the pearls are all the functions that fit together. That's how it's formed. So the things that I'm seeing that I think help organizations around CX are, I think we're now in a world where data systems, CRM systems, capture should be helping us to really achieve the levels of personalization that customers crave. You know, we've took this term hyper personalization or whatever, but just being able to tailor your offering, tailor your conversations, build things in that meet the preferences and collect data about the preferences of your customers is really key. You know, if you look at the hospitality industry and hotels in particular, being able to capture customers' preference, the room they want, the pillow that they want, you know, the side of the building that if they're staying with you regularly, you know, you can now choose, I want a preference of this view or that view, but being able to do that and being able to use that data and use it in real time to, you know, curate experiences, right down to simple things like just using the customer's name. You know, how often do you speak to a contact center these days and they ask you your name, you tell them, and they never use your name again in the entire conversation until the very end? You know, it's a real simple thing to do. So I think hyper personalization is critical, you know, is a key thing. And as I said, data, connectivity between systems, the ability to capture, the ability to use AI and tools to be able to quickly stitch those together is an area. I think AI in general is a really key area. You know, there's lots of stuff being talked about. You know, is it going to replace jobs? Is it going to replace things in the contact center? Yes, it will enable customers to get help quicker, so through those contact channels. But AI across the different disciplines, you know, we were user testing probably 5 or 6 years ago some early AI in writing headlines in marketing emails. So what it would do, it would track which emails were clicked on and opened through, and it would suggest rewrites of headlines, content based upon the interactions. And that was early AI machine learning that was doing that. So I think that's now kind of accelerated. There's way better technology, the ability to use machine learning and AI to analyze data, so structured and unstructured. I know we've talked a lot about structured and unstructured data. You know, the days of relying on a survey for somebody to tell you what they feel about their service are fading. We should be able to capture real-time moments, you know, on review sites, social media, where people are leaving comments, you know, all of that, but being able to assimilate that data, consume it, and turn it into meaningful insight using AI is another area that I think is really, really key. Also, I think AI plays a real role in internal learning and development, particularly knowledge sharing, creating consistency, so people are giving the right information out to customers as well through customer service or through the things that they're building. So there's some real interesting use cases emerging around that. So I think that's another area. So personalization, AI. I think that things like, you know, the digital tools to be able to make things easier. So interfaces are still, you know, things like, you know, apps and payment systems, and all those have got ways to go in which they're developing to reduce the effort that customers need to go through to do that. And I think probably a non-technology one that we touched upon, the other fourth one that's emerging or was emerging last year, that's still emerging and still kind of language that people are using, is that the connection between employee experience and customer experience, and realizing that they're part of the same thing and they're not separate, but actually one leans into the other. You know, people often quote the famous Branson quote where he says, you know, the most important people in your business aren't your customers, they're your people. If you take care of your people, they'll take care of your customers. And there is a lot of truth in that. And we've often been guilty of focusing on the external where we've not really focused on the internal. And great customer experience is a mirror of the internal culture.
Yeah. Fascinating. And I think there's a couple of things that resonate there with me. That I think, firstly, you know, AI dominated the headlines last year. I think it will again this year. But you sort of touched on same things that I'm thinking about, like its power to do some of the hard yard stuff and linking things together and crunching things through. I've sort of got this vision of, you know, could you plot a customer journey? Could AI write then a conversational analytics model for you, so that when somebody in your unstructured data mentions any part of the journey, it knows where to put it, it puts the feedback in, it makes the whole thing better. And you mentioned something pretty cool when we were talking the other day about, like, what was it, a digital twin of your customer base?
I saw this really fascinating presentation when I was at a conference last year, and we were talking about developing digital twins. And you almost take your entire customer base, create a digital twin, and then use that like as a test and learn bed where you can test decisions that you make in that twin without making it real to see what the potential impacts of your decision making is. So if you want to, you know, for example, at a real baseline level, you could create some content marketing strategy, put it through your digital twin and see, you know, open rates, click-through rates, you know, it would, some of those behaviors predict, or trying to see by changing the customer journey, what might happen to conversion rates, upsell rates, etc. if you did some kind of adjustment. So create that digital twin. And also you could apply it to your organization. If you created a digital twin of your organization and you made some changes, you could predict or see some of what will happen culturally in your organization too. So, I mean, yeah, all the conversation, a lot of the conversation in AI, particularly in customer experiences around customer service and the application to it, customer service. But I think thinking bigger about AI, its speed, its data consumption, and being able to get you to conclusion faster. It's the ability to take complex bits of data and simplify. I think all of those things are fantastic.
I love that. And I just, that digital twin idea, I mean, if we talked about that even maybe 2 years ago, people would have just thought we were completely nuts, right? And it almost feels that it's something that's on the cusp of this technology being able to do. I love that. And I can't wait to see something that you've done in that space, because I think that would be pretty cool. Just another little point going back to what you're saying about hyper personalization, whatever, and the use of data to do that. I've spoken with people a lot about, do you actually have a customer experience led data strategy? I think, you know, organizations have lots of data and they have a data strategy maybe. I once said to the CTO I was working with, this is great, you know, your data is fantastic, but for me it's like a nice bottle of wine when you haven't got a corkscrew. I would have to bash it on my shoe to get to the good stuff, right? But makes me think, like, do you think organizations are actually set up to think how they're using all of this data in personalization, or is it all just sort of there in a system, but we're still just doing the old, hi, insert name, I know you bought this kind of email or something like that?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously it depends, doesn't it? I think there are some organizations that are doing some really groundbreaking stuff and absolutely doing that, you know, particularly when you're a greenfield business that's been set up from scratch, you might have a more deliberate strategy.
A lot easier.
Yeah, capture data. This is how we're going to use it. We've got a long-term strategy that says if we capture this now, we'll use those data points later on. You know, think about Amazon, think about Netflix, think about those organizations that really depend on customer data and behavioral analytics to be able to enhance the experience because they're making recommendations and personalizing content, right? But if you go back to a legacy business, you know, like a lot of our high street banks and co, they've probably still got legacy systems that are hamstringing their ability to do things. But I think generally people are probably cobbling it together as we're going along in 2 or 3 year cycles with a more kind of short-term application. So this is how we use the data, but it's not really brought together by multiple angles. It's probably used either driven by a marketing strategy or a marketing lens on to go, let's segment our customer data so we can market to them better and talk to them better. Whether it's done purely from a customer perspective or not, I don't think there are many organizations that do it purely in that way. And I think also if you just did it from customer, that would be wrong as well. I think you've got to, the data's the data, and it's the ability to use that data in those different contexts that's the most important thing. So like I said, I think the technology today is available where, look, most organizations are data rich but insight poor. What's emerging now is the ability to turn that data into really meaningful insight that people can actually act upon. So, you know, your example earlier of, would there be an AI that could map a customer journey, take real-time data, create insight that says, look, today it looks like we've got a problem emerging over here in the customer journey because we're hearing a lot of chatter on Twitter, or this is coming through, or call volumes have spiked, and when we're listening to calls, customers are mentioning all these things. here's something we need to fix in a real kind of baseline user case, to something more complex. I think that's a world that could exist about, being able to create that real-time insight. But of course, with everything, it's creating the bandwidth for people to be able to act upon that insight. Having the insight's one thing, but being able to act upon it, and then also being able to then embed those decision-making points into your organization so they become part of your prioritization conversation. So what tends to happen in closed feedback loop type systems is that it's quite tactical. So you pick up the feedback, you feed it through to the customer team fix it into operations, they onboard the fix and do what they need to do, and then it loops back around. But what's not necessarily happening at the other side is that same intelligence is then feeding the more strategic decisions. So what's our long-term technology strategy? Do we need to make different decisions about our stack? Do we need to make different decisions? So it's not forming part of the broader strategic conversation necessarily, which it should do. But if I think you get the balance right, going back to your earlier question about the tips, you can do the short-term fixes, but actually you're feeding that longer-term strategic part of the business as well. And that's where the conversation gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because when we're prioritizing resources in an organization and what things we're deploying, that customer intelligence should form part of that decision-making process.
Yeah, it becomes a fascinating and complex web, doesn't it? And I think probably somebody somewhere has to have that vision of, this is how I want this to work, and this is the tools I need to do that. And sort of, we talked a lot about technology and tools and things like that. Obviously, that's close to our hearts at Question Pro. When you're speaking to people or in your previous roles, how do you assess these innovations or these tools that people come to you with and think, that might be something for me?
So one of the ways that we were able to do it, particularly when I was at National Express, we set up something called Nexus, which was National Express Innovation and Science, which was an innovation hub. So we would create problem statements and invite companies in to pitch to do a 12-week sprint program with us to take something and develop a proof of concept based upon their tech. So some of the examples that I'll share with you were, we had a company that used tracking, anonymized data tracking on a mobile phone that could track the same mobile phone on a journey. It didn't tell them who the person was. So it was completely anonymized data that we're just tracking. And we could use that data was typically used in shopping malls to look at footfall and where footfall was going. But reapplying that to go, actually, where are people going to, and does that help us to plan our journeys or create new routes, was a real interesting application. Right through to, we had a conversational AI tool that we adopted onto the website. There were facial recognition. We were talking about ticketless travel, and could you use the face as a ticket? Right. So there's a real clever facial recognition technology that was doing that. Another one I remember was a clothing manufacturer that had tech wearables within their clothing, so monitoring the vital signs. So if you imagine if you're a coach driver, you're on a long journey, you want to be able to monitor fatigue, mental focus. So really some really kind of crazy things. So we would invite them into that, and then some of those would make it into the business. And now, if you don't have an innovation lab, the way that I would then take that forward was within your team, creating space to do some test and learn. So taking something, isolating it, applying something to it, and creating a test case and saying, hey, look, we've done this. So I think doing those proof of concepts are interesting. And what I would say, and something that I've learned more recently, and I'm not going to lie and say this, I've always thought this because it's something I thought, God, when you've drawn it that way, it makes so much sense. One of the barriers that tends to happen is when you've done the proof of concept, getting it into live, you then run into a bunch of barriers like data security or the procurement team haven't been involved, or the business unit that you're trying to get it into there's a resistance there. So as well as doing a proof of concept, it's also doing a proof of feasibility. So actually at the same time involving the sort of the department that might take it on board, data security, legal team, to kind of see, if we do a proof of concept, is it feasible? And sometimes where we fell down was not doing the feasibility thing early enough. So I think that's a really great way of trying things. But I think generally speaking, I think more organizations adopting a test and learn or some kind of test lab where they can do things. I mean, there are some great examples. I mean, you shared some of the things in Question Pro about the ability to ask questions and get quick responses back in surveys. but also there are platforms like usertesting.com that we use, where when we were making changes to the digital journey, we were able to take prospective customers through it, or customers with matching demographics, and use them to kind of give us feedback in real time and interview them and learn from them without putting stuff live, and then using that data to validate the business case to then put it live.
Yeah. So really about understanding what it means to you, what it can do for you before going fully into getting it out there in the wild.
Yeah.
Vinay, thank you so much. That's been a fascinating and far-reaching conversation. Hopefully some inspiration for our listeners out there. So yeah, thank you to those listening. Thank you to Vinay. And just before we wrap it up, I'd like to introduce next week's guest for the Fireside Chats. We'll have Karine Pepin from 2CV in the US joining us, talking to Jake, our account director for market research. Thanks again, Vinay, and thanks everyone.
Thank you.